Number 6. A formal consent to the wickedness of these impositions were the less matter if payment of them were not also a concurrence to assist them, and a strengthening their hands in it. But this is so manifest that the paying of the cess, locality, fines, fees, etc., is a concurrence with and contributing towards the promoting of the wicked designs for which they are imposed, that he must have a conscience of brass, and in a great measure seared, who will run upon such a formal engagement against the Lord and his anointed King in Zion. If it was Aaron's sin which made the people naked, and which brought so great a sin upon them to take, and the people's sin and shame to give, that contribution of golden earrings to make a calf, Exodus 22, verse 3, etc., and if it was Gideon's sin to take, and Israel's to give, that contribution of the earrings of their prey to make an ephod, Judges 8, verse 25, then as it is our oppressor's sin to take, so it must be our sin and shame to give, their demanded exaction to help them in erecting such idols of jealousy as they have set up, and are commanding all to bow to provoke the Lord to jealousy, especially when they affrontedly require such contributions to be paid, both as punishments for not assisting and as means to assist in their establishment. Should we thus help the ungodly and love them that hate the Lord? 2 Chronicles 19, verse 2. Alas, instead of arguing, it were more fit to fall a-weeping when it come to be a question amongst us whether, instead of coming to the help of the Lord against the mighty, we shall really help the mighty against the Lord, and that while they call for our assistance formally upon this declared account. As the very inscription of their acts does carry in at their front, requiring a supply to his majesty, etc., if this be not a casting in a lot among them, who can tell what it is? Sure, it is a preparing a table for that troop, and a furnishing a drink offering unto that number, Isaiah 65, verse 31. Seeing it is a supplying them with necessaries, to solemnize their idolatrous festivities, who forsake the Lord, and not only forget, but lay waste his holy mountain, for which all that have any occasion to it are threatened to be numbered to the sword. If anything be a strengthening his hands of evildoers, Jeremiah 23, verse 14, this certainly is it. This certainly is. For as they cannot accomplish their cursed ends without these exactions, so the payment of them is all the present personal and public concurrence in waging this war with heaven that is required of the nation, to wit, such a sum to furnish them with all necessaries and maintain the executioners of their hell-hatched and heaven-daring decrees and orders, and the law requiring no more but contributing what is appointed, looks equally upon the givers as followers of the command, and active concurrers in complying with its end and carrying on and promoving its design, and so affoils them from all the statute severities in case of deficiency. 7th, if it were only a concurrence in their wickedness to pay those their exacted supplies, it were more easily comported with, but I bear it shall be found a higher in reward for their wicked service. At first they were only enacted and exacted as helps to capacitate this Popish, Prelatical, and malignant faction to prosecute the war they had undertaken and declared against Christ. But now, having thereby been enabled to carry it through this length, that they have almost got all visible appearances for Christ in owning his gospel and propagating his testimony, quite suppressed by means of these impositions, and having got the fields cleared of those that formerly opposed their course and career, and all obstacles removed that might stand in the way of the reception they have prepared for their mistress, the Babylonish lady, the mother of harlots, they now demand these payments as their wages and hire for their labor, which to pay now is more than a justifying, seeing it is a rewarding them for their work. And to pay these pimps, and to purchase their peace thereby, is worse than to bring the hire of a whore into the house of the Lord, Deuteronomy 23, verse 18, since it is a hiring them to bring the whore into the house of the Lord. Oh, how hath Scotland played the harlot with many lovers! Is this the zeal we should have had to our covenanted husband, and the honor of his house, that we have not only suffered his enemies to come in and take possession of it, but have consented to their engagement? And not only consented, but invited them to come in, and not only invited them, but prostituted our estates and consciences also to their arbitrary lusts, and not only played the harlot with them, but hired them also when they had done. And for this the Lord may say to Scotland, as he has said to his people of old, quote, they give gifts to all whores, but thou givest thy gifts to all thy lovers, and hirest them, that they may come unto thee on every side, for thy whoredom. And the contrary is in thee, from other women in thy whoredoms, in that thou givest a reward, and no reward is given unto thee, therefore thou art contrary, unquote. Ezekiel 16, verses 33 and 34. Therefore Israel is taxed for hiring the Assyrians, but let it be considered and inquired into in the history how this was. What evidence can be given of this in their transactions with them? Was it only that they were enticed, or did entice them into a communion with their idolatry? It is true, Ahaz may be an instance of that in his sending the pattern of the altar he saw at Damascus, 2 Kings 16, verse 10. And it cannot be denied, but in several respects they did partake with the Assyrians in their idolatry, which was their adultery. But what could be their hire they gave them for it, if it was not their taxations they paid, and money they sent unto them, as Ahaz did in verse 8, and Hezekiah also, though a good man, 2 Kings 18, verses 14 and 15, which can no more be justified than Asa's paying to Benhadad. It was then their confederacies, and the hire of them the Lord calls the hire they gave unto their lovers. With this also Ephraim is charged that he hired lovers, Hosea 8, verse 9 and 10. Of this we have instances in Menaem's giving to Pul 1,000 talents of silver and exacting it of the people, 2 Kings 15, verses 19 and 20. And in Hoshea's becoming servant to Shalmaneser, king of Syria, and giving him presents, 2 Kings 17, verse 3. If then hiring wicked men in confederacies to help the Lord's people be a hiring of lovers, so much condemned in Scripture, what must a hiring of them to hurt them, and rewarding them after they have done, and when they formally seek it for such work be? But a giving the reward they seek to slay the innocent, Deuteronomy 27, verse 25, and a voluntary yielding that which they take, Ezekiel 22, verse 12, which, if it be sin in the takers, cannot be justified in the givers, but will render both obnoxious to the indignation of a provoked God, in the day when he shall begin to contend for the wrongs he hath got, both by the work and the wages. Now let all the acts for the cess and continuation thereof, and other acts and edicts for fines and forfeitures, be considered in their just import, according to the true meaning of the enactors, and the causes for which they exact them, and will have them complied with. It will be found they were both declared, intended, and improved, and accordingly approved by the compliers, not only as helps, but as hires for our oppressors and destroyers, and for such as have been and are more destructive and explicitly declared enemies to Christ's interests and people in Scotland than ever the Assyrians were to the church in the Old Testament. The cess was not only a help, but a hire to the tyrant and his accomplices for suppressing meetings for gospel ordinances, especially the continuation of it from time to time, was humbly, unanimously, cheerfully, and heartily offered, for themselves and in name of, and as representing his kingdom, this kingdom, as a hire for the doing of it, and an encouragement to suppress what remained of these conventicles. The locality was intended as a help to the soldiers in their quarterings upon this account, but afterwards being expressly discharged to be furnished without paying according to the current rates of the country. Act 3, Parliament 3, King Charles II, August 20th, 1681. The contribution of it for naught must be interpreted for a reward of their service. Fines are appointed not only for a punishment of contraveners of their wicked laws, but for a hire to their most violent executors. Stipends for a hire to their hireling curates, and fees as a hire to jailers to keep the Lord's people in bondage, by which hires these destroyers have been rewarded, by them whom they have destroyed, and for which the righteous Lord will reward both. Eighth, let it be considered how far these submissions are short of, and how clearly these compliances are inconsistent with, that duty which lies upon us with reference to them. Our obligation to God and our brethren both indispensably bind us to a contrary carriage. If it bind us in our station and capacity to an active renitency, it doth much more bind us up from such compliances. Neither is it imaginable how moral force can ever justify our doing that deed. We are obliged by all imaginable bonds, yea, if in any probable capacity, by the utmost of real force to counteract. Can we give them that which they require, and by which they are enabled to murder our brethren, when we are so indispensably obliged to rescue our brethren, Proverbs 24, verses 11 and 12, to relieve the oppressed, Isaiah 1, verse 27, to loose the bonds of wickedness, to undo the heavy burdens, to let the oppressed go free, and to break every yoke, Isaiah 58, verse 6? What do we owe to these enemies, but seeing they have constitute themselves by these acts implacable enemies to Christ, his people and interest, in habite, not only plainly and importunately to pray that he would overturn them, but to oppose their course to the utmost of our power, and to concur to wrest that power out of their hands. And since they will needs make the whole nation a curse, they are so far from being to be complied with, that for these exactings and exactions they are to be looked upon and carried unto, not only as these who have sold themselves to work wickedness, but endeavor also to engage with themselves all in the same guilt, and expose them to the same curse. And therefore that the anger of the Lord may be turned away from his people, every one in his station is obliged to endeavor to bring these Achans to condign punishment. Ninthly, as it must be taken for granted that these wicked oppressions by law are perjury avouched in the sight of God, yet in a peculiar manner our covenanted subjection unto him is turned into an open war against him. So we cannot but believe that for this height of wickedness the curse of God, to which in the covenant the nation in case of breach is liable by their own consent, and the mediator's malediction shall follow, pursue, overtake, and fall upon the head of these who have made the decrees, and upon all who concur in the execution and carry on this course. Oh, it is impossible to keep them company, and not fall with them into the hands of the living God. Well then, seeing every one for whom these exactions are required is under an anterior obligation to God, and the brethren to preserve these precious interests, which the imposers have been long essaying to root out and ruin, and his people whom they have been destroying, with the loss of all he hath, life not excepted. For I suppose none who acknowledgeth his soul is still under the bond of the covenant, and it is likely to cost him his soul who denies it. But he will own this to be duty, nay, none who hath any sense of religion, but extracting from the subjective obligation of a sworn covenant, he will own an objective obligation from the law of the great superior, that doth immediately bind the conscience to witness against this course, and to lay down, if it should come to that, his life for his brethren. Then for a man to give his goods to destroy these things and persons, which he is obliged to defend and preserve with the loss of all, is so clear on making himself a transgressor, in paying his proportion, and being at the expense of destroying what he built, and building what he destroyed, that it seems inexplicable how he can dream to be innocent, especially when more lies upon it than the souls of the compliers are worth, even the interest of Christ in the land. And to close this, I would put home the question, and pose the conscience of any that took the covenant. If in that day the question had been asked at him, whether he would have judged the paying of assess for the ends narrated to suppress a testimony for the covenanted reformation, the paying of fines and fees for owning it, to the overturners, breakers, and burners of it to be a plain perjury and palpable counteracting of the ends thereof, let him speak his soul, and it is beyond debate with me, he will not dare to say he took it in a sense which can subsist with these compliances. Nay, I doubt not, if to any morally serious it had been then said, you will pay money, etc., for destroying this covenant and its ends, and deleting the remnant that shall be found to adhere to it, he would have been given Hazael's answer. It concerns every man that would be free of the curse of it, to consider how he is brought to make enquiry after vows, or to dream of consistencies between the performing those engagements and the plainest concurring in a counteracting thereof.